All right, let's get started. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Gary Grotto, the executive editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and this is Morning Scoop. Today, we're going to look at the lingering effects of COVID-19 on education in Arizona. You know, if you go out in public today, you'll see, just an occasional mask. The restaurants are packed. The little 6-foot markers on the floors of the stores are fading, and children are back in the classroom. But don't let those full classrooms fool you. Public education is not back to normal yet. So the pandemic has left verifiable decreases in proficiency in learning and increased disruption. Our panel today is going to discuss how children in Arizona in all demographic categories have fallen behind and what can be done to recover. First, I want to thank Helios Education Foundation for sponsoring today's Morning Scoop. And I want to introduce one of our panelists, Paul Luna, the president and CEO of Helios, to speak a little bit about the organization and why we're here today. Paul?
Well, thank you, Gary. It's my honor to be here to represent Helios Education Foundation. I want to first thank you and the Arizona Capital Times for hosting this conversation on what we believe is a really significant issue for all of our state and for all Arizonans. We're excited, as always, to partner with you as we've done before. And I think this particular convening is particularly important. And the timing of it, I think, is right in terms of really honing in and understanding what the lingering effects of COVID has been on all of our students. And in particular, I would say, students from communities that we would describe as traditionally underserved. I think it's fair to say that in education, there's always been, for many of us, a commitment to try to ensure that all students have equal access to achieve and to earn a quality education. And there have been historical gaps. And what we're seeing now is the implications and the impact of COVID on so many of our low-income, traditionally underserved, predominantly students of color, Latino students, is having a real impact. And so the opportunity to be here today with some of our collaborative partners in this work to really hear and understand what's happening in the schools, in the classroom, what our state leadership are doing, I think is going to be very valuable for all of us. We're proud to be, again, a part of this conversation. The education brief that is really providing some of the data, increased disruption, decreased progress, was a collaborative partnership with representatives that are here today with us. Rich Taylor from the Arizona Department of Ed, Kat Urbanin from the Arizona State Board of Education. It was our three entities that really collaborated together to bring this information forward and to create an opportunity for these types of conversations, really focused on what do we need to be doing? How do we address now these issues? Many have been longstanding, but the COVID and the pandemic has put a spotlight on these challenges. And I think the opportunity to learn today from real informed individuals on what we can do to address these challenges for our students today. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here and to be part of this conversation.
All right, thank you, Paul. And now I want to introduce the rest of the panel. First, we have Ketcher Baden. Ketcher's the Deputy Director at Arizona State Board of Education. Since 2017, he's advised the board on a range of K-12 education policies, including student assessment, school accountability, early literacy, and educator preparation and certification. Previously, he was on the nonpartisan staff as the legislative research analyst for the Arizona Senate Education Committee. Good morning, Ketcher.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And next we have Richie Taylor. Richie is a native of Safford and a proud graduate of Arizona's public schools. He started his career working on television advertising sales in Phoenix, and later worked for the Maricopa County Human Services Department, leading communications and strategic planning work. After working for Maricopa County, Richie worked as a communications manager for the New York City Mayor's office before returning to home to serve as communications director for the Arizona Department of Education under the leadership of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Kathy Hoffman. He now leads communications and policy work for the Department of Education. Also on our panel is Jamie Sheldall. Jamie is the superintendent of Yuma Elementary School. In his more than 30-year career, Jamie has taught middle school language arts and high school English. He's also served in administration at 3 different high schools and was an associate superintendent in Yuma High School District before beginning his current position in 2016. Good morning, James.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yep. And I think I forgot to say good morning to you, Richie. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And you've already met Paul Luna, but I want to tell you a little bit more about him. He's nationally recognized leader in philanthropy, education, and community development. Since 2006, he served as president and CEO of Helios Education Foundation, where he has led the foundation in its efforts to create opportunities for individuals to succeed in post-secondary education. In this role, he's responsible for guiding the strategic direction of the organization, cultivating strong community relationships, and initiating strategic partnerships in Arizona and Florida. So once again, thank you for being here, Paul.
Thank you, Gary. Pleasure to be here with you all.
And I want to quickly remind our audience that, they can participate too by submitting questions through the chat, and our panelists will be happy to answer. So Helios Foundation, the Arizona Department of Education, State Board of Education, the Center for Assessment, ABT Associates, and ASU Helios Decision Center for Educational Excellence. All you partnered in a study to study the impact of COVID-19 had on and continues to have on learning in Arizona public schools. And you made a few findings, and let's start with the decreased proficiency in English and math. And if you'll bear with me, I'm going to put a slide up here. So, Paul, can you tell us what this first, hold on one second. What this first slide shows us. This has to do with the proficiency decrease in English and mathematics.
Yeah, I think the best way to just understand this, and we can go deep into the detail, and we'll hear directly from a superintendent and his team in terms of what we're doing. But I think the takeaway is significant in the sense that when you look at English language arts proficiency by grade and by mathematics across the spectrum, you'll see by grade in all categories between fiscal year, school year 2019 and 2021, you're seeing this decreased proficiency. And at the core, and why that's important is that, as we know, and as we've learned through other research, the future of our state and our economy will be driven by our ability to educate our students to be able to move into the type of jobs and careers that are going to be available to them, but which significantly require some type of post-secondary education success. So when you're looking at academic proficiencies at this level, and you're seeing how they've dropped because of the impacts of COVID and the pandemic, the challenge is how do we ensure that we improve our students' proficiency so that they are academically prepared to continue to move through the education continuum and ideally graduate from high school, ready to move into some type of post-secondary education. Hopefully many will move into earn 2 years and 4-year degrees. But if we don't ensure that our students are academically prepared across the full continuum, then there's going to be challenges. And this is what I think we're trying to get at the heart of. How do we all collaborate and work together to begin to address some of these proficiency challenges that we see as now real data and evidence of impact of COVID?
Catcher, on a year-to-year basis, if you were to compare, year-to-year scores or data from pre-pandemic days, what would you typically have seen as far as gains and decreases in proficiency?
Yeah, we have on a year-to-year basis, so there's about 1.1 million students in the state. based on the grades that we test and when we test, that's maybe about 500,000 test records, 500,000 students taking an assessment. So year over year, the changes are in normal circumstances are not that large. That's a large number of students, and moving those percentages up, which is what we had been doing pre-pandemic, especially for things like third grade English language arts, third grade reading. Those had for several years been moving up a percentage point or 2 or 3 percentage points every year. That is, by all accounts, not just in Arizona, but around the country, moving that number of students by just a few percentage points is significant. That's good growth. That's a good trajectory. The orders of magnitude that we are seeing, that you're seeing displayed on the screen, and the percent changes are unprecedented. I mean, this is just not something that you see with such a large group of students. Now, there might be changes at the school levels that you see with these sorts of changes in percent proficient, but that's because it's a much smaller sample size, and it's the ability to change is a lot faster and a lot easier. But these are really unprecedented changes in proficiency that are obviously going in the wrong direction. And I want to make clear, when I say proficiency, those students were still learning during COVID, during the learning disruptions that the state experienced. They were just not learning at anywhere near the rates that we had been experiencing pre-pandemic. And as Paul had alluded to, and I think we'll talk about it more later too, there were certain students who were disproportionately impacted more than others.
And who were those students that were disproportionately impacted?
Those students who were historically underserved, I think, as Paul pointed it out specifically, I mean, the students in poverty, Latino students, Black students, Native American students, those students who we were already experiencing gaps in opportunity and achievement for years that we have been trying to work collaboratively to try to address. Those students got hit the hardest, and it's really unfortunate, but also, I guess a good way to look at it as an opportunity for us to continue working together to try to address this.
Now, Jamie, we had the graph up. I mean, what does it look like in the classroom? That kind of drop.
Well, I think if we could pick out one characteristic that really led to that drop, is disruption. The students were out of, if you look at that data, 2020, 2021, the students were out of school a good part of the year. Even when we were able to get kids back in, there was still significant disruption related to COVID. There was quarantining. There were families that wouldn't send their children to school, especially in our poor neighborhoods where we have a lot of multi-generational households. So there was just a significant amount of disruption in terms of attendance, especially. So it was really challenging for teachers to do what they've done in the past, which is to, deliver excellent first instruction, to assess how kids are doing in the classroom, to make adjustments in the classroom, group kids accordingly. When you don't have that consistency and routine in the classroom, it just becomes a real challenge, and the teachers are not able to intervene and move kids along at the same level. And when you look at the number of students who just frankly were out, when the predominance of research talks about one of the most important impacting factors in education is opportunity to learn. And usually when they talk about that, they talk about access to on-grade curriculum and good resources and so on. But the biggest barrier to the opportunity to learn is just not being in school. So we had, during the year that this data reflects, the level of disruption due to attendance for a lot of reasons was the key factor.
And I mean, is in-person instruction proven to be better than, we can do these Zoom conferences and, we learn how to adapt with that. I mean, is it just better to be in person when it comes to learning?
I think there's no question. That the fact is that kids need to learn from people they know, people who are, and you can't make those relationships, build those strong teacher-student relationships over the computer screen. It needs to be in person. The teachers need to see the whites of the kids' eyes. They need to be able to group kids and interact with them in a much more professionally intimate way in the classroom in order to be more effective. And just it showed me that what happened when we came back in the fall of 21. If you remember, COVID was we thought we were kind of smooth sailing entering the fall of 21, and then we got hammered again with the big COVID surge, and there was no no immunization yet for kids under 18. We had, again, quarantining and a lot of kids out, a lot of teachers out, and that disruption resulted in not only attendance issues but behavioral issues. So we saw what an important place school is in order for kids to establish those that social intelligence and learn how to interact effectively and appropriately in a larger community.
All right, now let's talk about third grade reading for a minute. And I'll get with you in a minute there, Richie. I don't want you to hang out too long without talking, but I just want to go back to Catcher for a minute because we talked about this the other day. Now, first of all, the importance of third grade reading, I think we all know, but if you could just touch on that a little bit, being proficient by the third grade. And then, what we do in the state if kids can't read proficiently by the third grade.
Sure. So there's voluminous research that suggests that students who are unable to read at grade level by third grade, their chances of succeeding in school and in life drop precipitously. And by succeed, I mean graduate high school, get a high earning job, go to college, earning a credential. And so as a state, about 10 years ago, the state established a Move On When Reading program, which is funding in the statewide formula for schools to support students in the earlier grades to get to our statewide goal, which is we've all kind of collectively agreed on a statewide goal of about 72% of students proficient at the third grade. And part of that law also requires schools to submit literacy plans to the state that ensure that they are providing high quality instruction, that they're getting the professional development to their teachers that's high quality and based in the science of reading, that they're using curriculum and reading programs that are based in the science of reading and proven to be highly effective, and that they're providing interventions to students in kindergarten, in first grade, and second grade before that third grade milestone so that they can get up to proficiency. And that's because we know we get a lot more bang for your buck and a lot more growth for students in kinder, first, and second. You can't try to address the problem before we're already at that milestone. Now, part of that law is also that students who are not meeting the cut score established by the state on the statewide assessment are subject to retention. Now, there's exemptions to that retention requirement, like obtaining summer reading or students with disabilities, or testing proficient on another test if maybe they had a bad test day. So the law gets a lot of publicity for the retention part of that, but really the part that drives the success is those interventions that happen in kinder, first and second, and in third grade. And that's also borne out. Most of the dollars that schools get in the Move On When Reading program are to staff, are to help provide literacy coaches or reading coaches or interventionists in those early grades. And in this report, we saw that the earlier grades were hit some of the hardest, both in terms of proficiency, but also attendance, which is some of the things that the superintendent was outlining.
And I think we talked a little bit about interventions and retentions. Both were up, right? Or both up? Retention or interventions certainly were, and schools
As you know, when we see, they also administer local benchmark assessments all throughout kinder, first and second grade. And so they know long before we see statewide assessment results, long before, you know, my board looks at it in spring of 22, we'll get results from spring of 22, we'll get here in a few months, long before we see that schools have years of data on their benchmark assessments for students in kinder, first and second. And we see some of that data as well. And we see some of the same things that you're seeing here, which means that those interventions are going up as well, which is putting a real stress on schools to try to find you know, the teachers who are qualified to be able to provide those interventions that are high quality.
And Richie, real quickly, can you talk about where the data came from for that slide that I just showed?
Yeah, so I think that came from statewide assessments, and mostly, Paul, is that correct? Mostly of that data came from the statewide assessments and the data that this department collects throughout the year on student achievement.
Okay, and I also understand that, you know, the math proficiency saw a greater increase. Is that right? Paul?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you see that when you look at the slides, it's across both English language arts and mathematics, where you're seeing the decline of proficiency, which, as we all know, is the fundamentals. So as we were honing in on, I mean, I know one of the questions we got in the chat is, you know, so where might there have been across the grade levels the greatest, you know, concern of disruption in the proficiency? And I think it's important to acknowledge the early learning as we have right now is, you know, the reading proficiency of students, especially at third grade, is critically important. And we know that. But we also know along the pathway into post-secondary education and degree attainment and degree completion is the importance of mathematics as that fundamental as well. You know, we hear often many students is, you know, I would have earned my degree except for math, right? And I think that's what we have to also acknowledge is across all of the learning elements that we would want for our students to understand that proficiency, the importance of it, but especially in English and in mathematics are two important fundamental pieces of education attainment that we have to prioritize. I think the other point, if I could, is in acknowledging this data and what it means and where students are today. We have to recognize that, like in any situation where you're trying to catch up, the work is harder. We have to work twice as hard to gain the level of increase in proficiency that we might have been able to do in normal times, or if we weren't trying to catch up students. There's also a sense of urgency, right? We don't have time. I mean, the students will continue to progress from grade to grade. And so you don't have a lot of time and in order to help students catch up to grade level. And I think that's also what I think that today's conversation is about, is in recognizing where we are, is creating that sense of urgency and collaboration and partnership to come together and see how can we ensure across the entire state students are getting the supports they need to get back to grade level, to begin to increase that proficiency across all levels.
Is there more urgency, Paul, for, say, the older kids than, you know, a kid that just started kindergarten today? Or is the urgency across the board?
Well, I guess from my perspective, I don't think we would prioritize the urgency of one student or another. I think they're probably different. You know, when you're looking at the early grades, and I'll defer to my colleagues on the panel as well for their perspective on this, but my sense is, you know, when you're talking about students in the earlier grades, it is those fundamentals, you know, again, back to reading. That's why reading at grade level by third grade is so critically important for our students. But when you're looking at other grades, higher grades, you know, maybe high school students and such, it's also helping them to prepare for the continued pathway of education success. And how do you catch students up academically, but also how do you start to prepare them for the transition from high school into post-secondary education, into some type of college environment where they've been so disrupted in high school. You know, so it's not just a proficiency of the learning, it's also the discipline of how students prepare, how they engage, all of these challenges that many of the students have not been able to experience a full level of teaching That's why I think we don't prioritize one grade or the other, or but we recognize that the challenge for all is important, and there should be a sense of urgency that we all have on this.
Jamie, I got a question from someone in the audience, Lisa, and I want to put it to you, because we talked a little bit the other day about teacher retention, and and we'll get more into it as we talk about the disruptions. But one of the things you said was that older teachers just kind of retired, didn't want to deal with having to teach this way, the new way, and everything. So. And you mentioned, more teachers without college degrees.
Yes.
So
yes,
is it concerning that, are the panelists concerned about this, about how this will impact students struggling with proficiency in English and math?
I'm concerned about it. We had a wave of retirement, not just in Yuma County, but in, across the nation after 2020, 2021. Veteran teachers who could retire, a huge proportion of them did, and students just aren't entering. There's lots of data out there to show the declines in people entering education and education programs at the university level. So I think that's going to be a major challenge for us. We have only about 40% of our teachers in our incoming class are fully certified. We've had to rely on more than half as emergency certified, or even filling some spots with some long-term subs, so that we can have responsible adults, in the classroom with kids. And I don't think we're unique in that, in that way at all. So making education attractive, attracting young people, bright, talented people into the profession, it's going to take a lot of work at a lot of levels, but we can increase salaries, but that's only part of the picture. It's the job of teaching is it's never been more difficult and more challenging, even than it was in the fall of 2019, let alone now, in this COVID landscape.
I think that's a really important point. I think, when we're talking about recovery, one of the most critically important things that we have to do is ensure that students have access to a highly qualified teacher. I mean, beyond all the strategies and investments that are being made, making sure that students have access to someone who is capable to teach them the subject is really the most important thing that the state can do.
So what we've done, we're bringing our new teachers in earlier than ever. They have 2 full weeks of instruction. We have a team of instructional coaches. We don't assume any particular level of understanding or knowledge coming in, and we give them about a 10-day really focused and organized coaching to prepare them to enter the classroom. So that's a lot of resources that districts need to spend in terms of coaching and teacher prep, that otherwise, used to go into the classroom.
So, Paul, let's talk about the some of the subgroups that were noticeably worse decreases or larger decreases. Why does that matter? What did you see, and why does that matter?
Well, thank you for that. And I do want to, before I answer, just echo the importance of what we're just talking about, which was the teachers and the quality teacher in the classroom. That can't be minimized. And in fact, there probably could be a whole other morning scoop just talking about what teachers are facing and the challenges that they have. And I know just in the general work environment, which is just a basic level of everyone coming back and who's in person, who's not, how do you do your job remotely? Well, teachers and education leaders and administrators are uniquely positioned where they are in the school at the class, and we need to recognize those challenges as well as we address and acknowledge the challenges of students and student learning. To then answer the question, Gary, about kind of why is it important to understand where and how maybe demographics and subgroups of student populations play into this is is I think from our perspective at Helios comes back to the concept of this idea that we want every student to have the opportunity to be successful in education. And the reality is when you start to see, and I think what this education brief is pointing out is the pandemic shined a spotlight on many of the other challenges that affect a student's ability to be successful academically in the classroom and in their school. The effects of poverty on a student and a family, food insecurities, access to healthcare, gaps in technology. We talk a lot about the digital divide and the impact that that's had on different student populations where Wi-Fi might not be available in a student's community, and yet we're trying to expect them to learn remotely. Just also the importance of acknowledging, social and mental health challenges that I think probably it's fair to say we all have faced in trying to navigate this very unique pandemic. Well, students experience them as well, on all students. And so the focus on the subgroup is so that we can develop the unique strategies necessary to serve those populations of students. Not every solution is going to be the same for every school, for every geography. I grew up in Miami, Arizona. I know one of my colleagues grew up in Safford, so a little bit of rivalry there. We'll take that offline. But growing up in rural Arizona is different than growing up in inner city urban environments, or when you have, like down in Yuma, very unique, different geographic makeup of student populations. So the subgroup focus helps us to ensure that we are specifically aligning the supports that we need for the unique needs of the students, the families, and their communities. And, I don't know if others want to speak to that, but I know that that's a really important element of this briefing document, is so that we can get to those strategies.
I think Paul makes really important points. I don't think we can talk about student academic recovery without also talking about how we are holistically supporting families and children in our state because of all of the turbulence that we've gone through over the last couple of years with job loss and food insecurity and mental health issues. All of that has to be addressed if we're going to focus. That all plays into student academic success in the long run. And so I think we've got to be talking, we can't expect schools to solve these things in a vacuum. This is a societal problem that we need to work together on.
And we're not going to solve these challenges in one semester or 1 year. And I think that's the other takeaway, is that the impact of COVID and what this data is showing us is it's going to take multiple years of focused, committed engagement to be able to address the types of challenges that have been identified and that Richie just spoke to. And I think that's the other takeaway, hopefully for all of us, is that we have to be committed to addressing these issues, but we have to be committed for the long term, because it will take time and a concerted effort.
Well, let's talk about the recovery. What's the Department of Education doing in that regard, Richie? I understand you have some money.
We have some money. One of our primary responsibilities is getting the about $4 billion out the door to our schools so that they can have the impact with that money at the local level. And I'm sure the superintendent can speak to some of the things that they're doing with their ESSER money. But from the state level, we really tried to work collaboratively with different sectors of our state. We've really partnered heavily with our state universities who are providing support to local schools. We've invested a significant amount of money in hiring mental health professionals to fill wait lists at the local level. We've partnered, like I said, with a bunch of community-based organizations like the YMCA and Big Brothers Big Sisters to provide out-of-school support, because we know that schools can't do everything on their own, and having those community-based organizations who are embedded in their communities and know what children and families need, we're partnering with them on those things as well. So it's really an all of the above approach from the department on this, so that we, like I said, this is a crisis that requires all hands on deck and all interested players supporting students and families. And so that's where we've really tried to focus a lot of our investments.
And what are you doing with that money, Jamie? And what other steps have you taken on the local level to speed this recovery?
Well, we've really beefed up our before and after school programs. We have a number of schools that are 21st century learning community schools but we've been able to take the ESSER money and really replicate those programs across all 18 of our schools. We've had far and away the most robust summer school program the last 2 summers that we've ever seen. We've added positions. Finding the qualified teachers can be a challenge, but we've added positions in terms of homeschool liaisons to help bridge that gap between the families and the students. We've added counselors. We've also added classroom teachers, about 30 positions across the district in classroom teachers. So with ESSER money, we know that that's going to have a sunset date on it. People understand that, but just trying to staff up. One of our challenges is at this point in time, when it comes to especially summer school and the before and after, is just teacher exhaustion. It's hard to find enough people. We could have bigger and more robust before and after school and summer programs based on what revenue we have available through ESSER right now, but just finding the people who just have the they need to take care of themselves and their families too, from a personal and healthcare standpoint. And we've also got some, Paul talked a little bit about different demographics. I don't think people realize when it comes to migrant students, about 80% of the migrant students in the state of Arizona go to school in Yuma County. So that's a whole demographic, students who they have multiple disruptions a year. We also have 2 military installations in our attendance area where kids typically move every 3 years. So that the whole idea of just a migrant population, whether it's military or whether it's agricultural families, makes it even more challenging for us to provide those services.
And Catcher, what is the school board or the Board of Education, I should say, done policy-wise to address the recovery, and what have you advocated for the legislature?
Yeah, the State Board of Education does not have dollars at its disposal to provide to schools or otherwise, and like the superintendent, we're not on the ground we're actually providing the instruction to those students, that we do have board members individually who in their own capacities are classroom teachers or run schools themselves. So what the State Board of Education does do is advocate and adopt policies. So over the last couple of years, you've already heard me talk a lot about early literacy, and that's because early literacy has been and continues to be a big priority for this board. And the board advocated for, and the legislature appropriated last year, funding for literacy coaches that are deployed throughout the state to schools that are persistently struggling with reading for their early grades, kindergarten ready assessments, so that we can, as a state, take a look at students' readiness entering kindergarten, and sort of a formative assessment. So it's a good tool for schools to use as well. And then that's good data for the state to have to start pulling policy levers as needed. And other changes to the Move On Reading program that I already described to try to enhance that and make it better. But as the underlying theme that everybody's already hit on is that there's more to do. This is a problem that we have to continue to attack. And you've heard everybody already mention things around the teacher shortage and high quality educators in the classroom. We already know research shows that has one of the biggest, if not the biggest, impact in the school for student outcomes. And so that's always going to be a challenge. And it was before, just like the attainment gaps, the pandemic and the disruptions that it caused in learning exacerbated a lot of the problems that we were already seeing before. So the teacher shortage is one of those that the board will continue to make a priority to ensure that our educator preparation programs, both at public universities and community colleges and private ones, and now in our schools themselves, are churning out high quality candidates who are prepared and who have training, again, going back to literacy and things like the science of reading. But there's other things that the board would want to focus on too, or has already. Absenteeism is a big one that we've talked about, and school improvement. The legislature took a swing at some of that over the last couple of years, but couldn't get it across the finish line. And then there's been some other ideas. Paul had alluded to math being sort of the barrier for some students graduating. I think the board feels there's some things that we can do around like that Algebra 2 course as a graduation requirement that still keeps a high quality rigor and expectation for students so that they're prepared going into college, but it maybe isn't so limited to just Algebra 2 courses. So those are a few things, but and I just got to emphasize it again, we have to attack the problem. And we've talked a lot about subgroups and certain schools and areas and students were hit harder, but the whole state experiences. High achieving schools got hit and saw decreases in proficiency. We looked and our board asked, hey, find some outliers, find some high flyers, find some schools that did it well, that maybe even saw increases. And the amount of schools that we could find was very small. It was very small because everybody got hit. And so we can make targeted investments, and we should, but this is also a systems-wide and statewide issue that we'll have to tackle over the next few years.
You mentioned these literacy coaches. I'm just curious about that. Is it like a volunteer program, or program of volunteers that go in and help the schools, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, Richie can talk about it a little bit too, and or correct me. But and I mentioned Richie because the ADE was provided those dollars to hire these literacy coaches. They're high quality, they're highly experienced reading specialists. They're paid to go out in the state. Now the state, and I got to put a plug in here, we really appreciate that investment, and that's something that we learned from states like Mississippi that had like the highest early literacy ratings over the last few years. This is one of the strategies they used. And so we're very appreciative, and the board advocated for, and very appreciative of the 25 literacy coaches that will be deployed to schools and teachers to help support them in the classroom and to help students get that reading and literacy comprehension. But 25 is just frankly not going to cut it in the long term in terms of making an impact. And that really needs to be more like 50 or 75, which was our full ask. So that's probably something I would expect the board would probably re-up as an ask moving forward.
And in addition to the coaches that Ketra is talking about, we've also invested some of our COVID relief money partnering with Valley of the Sun United Way on developing literacy hubs throughout the state. And these will help serve students out of school time, like I said, before and after school, so that there's extra support for students who need that in their communities when they're not in the classroom as well. So in addition, like I said, in addition to what Ketra is talking about, we've invested some of our federal money here too, but the problem is going to be sustaining these resources after the ESSER funds run out in 2 years, and so it's going to be important that the state, continues to support strategies like this and increase support, depending on where the need is after the next couple of years.
Are we seeing signs of recovery? I guess anybody can answer that. Whoever wants to. Paul, are we seeing signs of recovery?
Well, I think we're seeing, as often the case in a situation like this, there are pockets of recovery, and there are good things happening in the classroom. There are great teachers that are serving students, and yes, so in pockets, there's the beginning of the recovery. I think what we're acknowledging though is more systemically and across the board and across the entire state, I think we have to put some intentionality behind how we serve students better to begin to see the improvements we want to see. It was pointed out that this percentage decrease is not insignificant, right? This is not normal in a sense, and we haven't been through a normal livelihood here in the last couple of years because of the pandemic. So I think we're at the point where we have to begin to create systemic improvement across, again, back to all grades, all students. And it requires work, and it requires investment. We've been talking about investment. We can't minimize that we need to continue to invest in our public schools strategically to deliver the type of improvement that we want to see. And that's going to be an important element. It's not the only element for improvement, but we can't minimize the importance of continued investment in our public schools, in our teachers, in our classrooms, in ensuring that every student has the same equal environment to be successful. There is one other element I know we'll maybe talk about a little bit, which is the idea that the pandemic has also increased the number of students who are missing school. So the idea of chronic absenteeism, I think, is also a significant challenge that we're seeing emerge. And I think that we need to do and learn and understand more about what's happening and why are students missing school and where are they and how do we get them back into the education system. And Jamie, I don't know if you on the ground as you're starting school are seeing that as well. I'd just be curious if you would speak to the importance of identifying where students are missing and how do we start to bring them back.
Yes, that's a great topic, Paul. We saw over a 5% drop in our average daily attendance last year. So that's significant. There are lots of different reasons. But one thing we know for sure is we really need to work with parents to get kids back in school. And it's different message for different families, right? We've got some highly impacted, financially, poverty impacted schools where a lot of parents are still very, very hesitant to send their kids back to school, and they're concerned about COVID. These are folks who maybe have multi-generational households. They work jobs where if they're sick, they don't get paid, so on. And then we've got other folks who just kind of got used to that kind of flexibility of whether they're in person or at home. And we need to make sure that we're sending the message that first of all, schools are safe right now. It's the safest place for a student to be. Statistically, there's no safer place for a kid to be than at school. And it's extremely important that they come every day. That's an everyday prospect. We don't want parents to send their kids to school sick, obviously, but we're going to get back to the messaging that we used to have, where the health offices get that messaging out to parents where, if they don't have a fever and they're just maybe feeling a little bit punky, unless, take that precaution, get the test. But if it's negative and we still have testing at school as that opportunity, then, the student's going to be better off in school. So that's that level of disruption in the classroom of students being chronically absent is can't be understated, I don't think. And we're, as a county, we put out kind of a generic, all the county superintendents in Yuma flyer that all the districts are picking up and kind of making their own to just really make that a central conversation piece across the county about just the importance of kids being back in school and attending regularly.
What's causing this chronic absenteeism? Do you have an idea?
I think it varies from family to family. Like I said, some families are still very, very hesitant to send their kids to school. There's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of anxiety. Our Rotary got a presentation from Arizona Children's Association last week, and the amount of social anxiety that they're seeing, that they're trying to help treat, of kids, coming back to school, re-entering that social environment has skyrocketed. So I think there's a long list of reasons. There's no single reason, and that's why we've tried to really beef up our community school programs and our positions like homeschool liaisons, so that they can reach out to individual families and help them navigate those concerns and those anxieties about bringing their kids to school, or help to communicate just the importance that that you need to plan your family activities. It would be best for your student if you planned your family activities during school breaks.
I think this also speaks to, the economic situation that families may be in, and parents that are having to work 2 to 3 jobs and may not be there to make sure that their student is getting to school on time or to school that day, is just another reason that we've got to think outside of the school and think about how we're supporting parents and families, because it impacts student learning.
Absolutely.
And I know this is an area that we shared before, where Helios and our research team, led by Paul Peralt, working with collaborative partners like we did with this most recent brief that we're talking about today, is doing some and working on to release a report on chronic absenteeism. to really start to better understand what the data is telling us of where students are missing across the continuum. And in fact, we're hosting a convening next week with school superintendents and school leadership. Jamie just shared with me that he and his team are going to be up for this discussion. Superintendent Hoffman, the State Board of Education, ADE, and others, to really talk about and understand what chronic absenteeism is, how it's impacting our schools, what we need to do, what maybe policies we need to put in place to help address this, because as Jamie indicated, I think the reason for the absenteeism is varied by community, by family, by economic situations. But it's the reality is if the student is not in the classroom, the student will not learn. And it's a fundamental challenge that we have. And our goal is to work with all of you and many of you watching that on how can we as a community come together as well to put supports and programs in place to help increase student attendance.
And this is why, thinking outside of the classroom and what, like the superintendent said, the community schools model is so important. These families need wraparound support and resources through positions like counselors and social workers to try to find what are the barriers. Why isn't the student coming to school? What do they need to feel comfortable or ready to come to school? And so, we've made big investments in counselors and social workers, but we're still near the bottom or at the bottom of the nation when it comes to our ratios for school counselors and social workers. And so it's critically important that we think outside of just the academic recovery box and think about how we're providing the supports to families that they need.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk about declining enrollment. Paul, can you talk a little bit about, like the percent changes in declining enrollment? And can we also talk about like where are these kids going?
Well, and I think that's the question is, I think the research that we're doing is trying to get at the heart of really understanding what the data is telling us on where the school are going. Where the students are going and where they're missing. There are some aspects and student populations that have returned. And I think that's what the data will show. And we'll get, we'll hone back in on traditionally underserved student populations. It's fair to say that the low income minority, Latino, Native American, Black student populations are not returning to the classroom at the same percentage rate as their peer white students. And so that's the question of what, so what is driving that? And where are the students? Are they still in the system somewhere, or are they just not attending any type of educational learning opportunity? And those are the answers I think that we're trying to use data to better understand, so that we can then collaborate on how we might improve that student attendance and get enrollment back. I mean, all the big trajectories are that if you looked at the what would be expected for the state of Arizona enrollment, we're not nearly back to where we would have been. And in fact, I think in terms of numbers overall, students returning back to classroom only get us back to the level of student enrollment that we were before the pandemic. So we are lagging behind, and this is an important number of students, because as we talk about, when you look at the demographics of our state, the vast majority of our students now in the education system are students of color, predominantly Latino. So when you see that population of students missing more school, that trend line doesn't support all of the statewide education objectives that we're trying to achieve. When we're trying to improve our overall post-secondary degree attainment rate, students not attending school, especially Latino students, is going to work against our ability to succeed.
All right, and Jamie, you talked a little bit about what your district was doing. You had people on the ground trying to track these kids down, right?
Yeah, we've I tell you, our especially our elementary principals, they're out making home visits with the counselor or with the home liaison. A lot of times they're just, especially during that 2020, 2021 year, a lot of times they were just gone. They would just kind of up and leave, and we wouldn't know where they went. So there's a challenge there. We're not sure where they went. We know that we had about a 10% reduction in our kindergarten enrollment for that year, which I thought would bounce back this past year, but it really didn't. So, but we're close to where we were pre-pandemic as far as overall enrollment. We did take about a 5.5% hit in that first year coming back, and we increased this last year by about 4.5%. But this also one thing that this really is problematic and is budgeting, because we have current year funding for schools. So during this really challenging time to try to predict enrollment, it's really hard to zero in on your budgets for the upcoming school year when you don't know for sure what your revenue is going to be until the school year is about over.
I think that exact point speaks to one of the most important things that we can do from a policy level at the state, is making sure that things are as stable for schools as possible, because the stability is so important for planning and making sure that anything we can be doing in terms of providing stability is something that the state and the legislature should be seriously considering.
I think that it's hard to be. You want to be as efficient as possible and put the money where you need it, but you also want to make sure that you're not in a position where you're going to have to make mid-year cutbacks. So, the more predictability you have in your budget, the more stability you have from a revenue standpoint, the more efficient and effective you can be in allocating those resources where they need to be, especially at the classroom level.
All right, we got about 2 minutes left. Paul, people can find this on their the briefing on your website, correct?
That is correct.
And so you end with a call to action. What's the call to action?
Well, I think 2 points that I would make in closing. Number one is I did see a comment that acknowledges that we're all males on this panel. And I'm sure that my daughter and my wife are going to give me an earful about that. They are very empowered Latinas who and I just wanted to acknowledge that. We have an opportunity to do this, and hopefully we'll do more of these types of conversations, and obviously we'll make sure that we are representative with females as well. So just wanted to acknowledge that, because I think that's important. But the other important closing comment is that there is work that we can do. I mean, so we talk in somewhat in dire terms around the impact of COVID, and because it's real. But the other thing I think we should take away is we have great dynamic leadership in our state that if we work together, these are issues that we can overcome. And in fact, and I believe strongly about this, about the state of Arizona, when you look at our demographics, which is essentially 15 to 20 years ahead of probably the demographics of every other state, we have an opportunity to lead the nation in education success for all students, and especially Latino students, because that's our biggest demographic. And coming together, working together, focused on how we improve student outcomes for all students, but addressing the particular needs of Latino student population is going to move Arizona as a state into a place of leadership nationally around education attainment. And I think it is us just coming together, using the data to target specific strategies to support our students to succeed, and our students will thrive. I absolutely believe that.
All right, thank you, Paul. So we've come up on an hour, and it's time to close the show. And I want to thank our panelists for being here and offering their informative insights. And I want to thank our audience for joining. And I also want to thank our sponsor, Helios Education Foundation. Now, this isn't the last word on this subject for Helios, or at least they're going to keep spreading the word. On Tuesday, they're going to be convening at the Helios Education Campus with school districts, education nonprofits, and education policymakers. So you got a couple seconds here to plug that if you'd like, Paul.
Yeah, and that's where we're really focusing, and we'll be releasing some of our information on chronic absenteeism and really looking at the broad impact of that COVID's had in terms of disruption, but also chronic absenteeism will be an important part of that. And we'll use our Helios Decision Theater as a means with which to provide that data, and really excited about this convening and hope that it will be the first of many opportunities to engage on solutions that will drive improved outcomes for Arizona and our education system.
All right, thank you. And once again, thank you. I'd like to thank the audience and everybody who was here today, and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.